So I'm really excited to have somebody with journalist training ask me some questions, because I think that's what's been missing all the time. And it turns out that you probably want to ask me questions anyway, so
Yeah.
It's kind of win-win, right? So why don't you start?
So I guess maybe to start from the beginning, most people, when you think of pathologist, you don't necessarily think of disaster response
Right.
analogously. So how did this all begin? How did you get involved with disaster response?
Well, I guess there are two sides of it. There is the Armenia earthquake and the coincidence of that occurring when I was having a meeting at the ASN to talk about a new acute renal failure society or entity. Anyway, a new organization we were going to create. It became the Acute Renal Failure Commission of the International Society of Nephrology. And so I was just, and I want to sort of emphasize that the vision that many people think that I had would include knowing a lot of things that I honestly didn't know at the beginning, at least not consciously. So I can't claim that when I started this thing, I had no thought that it would have clinical application, that you'd sort of be like treating patients around the world by forming this new society. I just thought, this is science, acute renal failure is really important. It's not talked enough about, it's not studied enough, so we were going to form a society to do that. Okay, but then the other part of it is that my situation as chair here at the University of Alberta was unusual, because my superior, the Dean of Medicine, Doug Wilson, had exactly the same interests that I did. I was a kidney pathologist, he was a renal clinician, but we were both interested in acute tubular injury, the pathophysiology of that. And we had been to a lot of the same meetings. It was kind of cool also that if you think about leadership, not just kind of the knee-jerk ideas about leadership, but real leadership, that leaders need to be humble and open, right? Those are things you don't usually think about. You think of macho and testosterone-infused leaders, but Doug was sort of like that. I was thinking, well, how can this guy be a dean? Because every time I've seen him chair a session, he seems so gentle and mild. How could that work? But it did work. It was fantastic. He was a great dean here, and he was inspired by the bright ideas that I would wake up with in the morning, and I knew that was a remarkable opportunity, because having been at Johns Hopkins, the prevailing philosophy, which I think can be justified, but at Johns Hopkins it was that the institution owned you. And if you wanted to do anything, you needed approval, and you needed to get it in writing, so you needed to write down and describe what you were going to do. And then if it was in the institution's interest, since they own you, they would decide whether you're going to do it or not. And so I came here as chair and felt that I really wasn't owned. As a matter of fact, maybe the owning was in the opposite direction. I owned things here, surprisingly, because I could wake up in the morning with a bright idea that seemed to me like a good thing to do, and find that Doug was completely supportive, and I could just do it. I didn't even have to have a written proposal. I could just do it. So a lot of the things that I did at that time, they were related to each other, but they came out of that freedom. So, and there are more of them than most people know. So, one was the Future of Pathology Laboratory Medicine in Canada Consortium. That came first. I came here and discovered that laboratory physicians had no interest in politics at all. They said, who has time? Want us to talk to politicians? Why would we do that? You know, and so I was realizing it's a completely powerless group of physicians who will be powerless forever unless they talk to politicians who are saying, who has time? And I thought, I have time, you know, like, I think this is worth doing, so we should get people together and talk about what we want, and, you know, and engage in political action and get that stuff going. So before the Banff Classification, before the, you know, disaster relief task force, I was started on this kind of organizing laboratory medicine professionals into some kind of lobbying group that could actually do things for themselves rather than be completely under the radar. So I had a lot of experience moderating consensus discussions. And just like I've been talking about, you know, humility, openness, that if you read anything about how to generate consensus, every document says get a professional facilitator, right? I mean, they all say that. And we've never done that. So it's been me rather, or somebody else like me, somebody that I trained, moderating consensus discussion. And the only way you can do that is to enter the room with a willingness to go with somebody else's idea if it's clearly better than your own. And, you know, if enough people in the room, there are bound to be better ideas than your own. And so that's a very important principle of how most of the things that I've done have actually activated. But then the other feature is, I thought, as you thought, that a disaster relief task force needs clinicians. They know about this stuff, right? And, you know, like if somebody gets sick right in front of them, they have an idea of what to do. Pathologists can give you a theory about what's wrong with you, but they have no idea really, in a practical sense, what to do. So when the Armenia earthquake occurred, everything shifted. And what
and
I
were
also
you in Armenia at one point?
no,
Or this is all,
I wasn't. But we were meeting about this new society, acute renal failure society, at exactly the time that the Armenia earthquake hit, and so we said, well, we must incorporate this idea of flying in, you know, dialysis help to places in the world that don't have that, and saving people in a crush injury like scenario. So it made sense to do that. My political skills at that point were extremely limited. I remember graphically the dinners and stuff, the talks at large tables with me running things. I would say something, half the people would like stiffen, like they couldn't believe I just said that. I'd say something else and the other half would stiffen. I thought, well, I gotta kind of work on my parliamentary skills here, because these periodic stiffening of half the people in the room is a pretty good sign that I'm not doing my job running this meeting properly. But no, that's what happened, and I assumed within days or weeks that there would be an insightful clinician who'd say, hey, you know, can I help you with this? Because, you know, it seems like it's kind of a burden, and you're not ideally cut out to run a worldwide task force. You're not trained in this. But instead, I found that people were downright scared of the harm to their career if they started doing this, that what their bosses had told them they're supposed to accomplish in their clinical role within the medical center or university that they're in would be all screwed up if they took over responsibility for this worldwide task force, which is not part of any NIH grant, and you know the sorts of things that they were expected to do. This simply seemed outside of that realm. Therefore, it would harm their future career, and they didn't dare to do it, even though they did agree that they knew more about disaster relief practical aspects than Kim Solez did. But let him be the sacrificial lamb here. Let him screw up his career, and So eventually, 7 years later, Norbert Lemire emerged as the clinician. He was well enough established and had really great political skills locally and internationally, and so he could withstand this supposed hit of people saying, he had a good career until he took over responsibility for this task force, and all went downhill from there. So that didn't really happen to him. He ended up same award that I won, that center one up there is the National Kidney Foundation Distinguished International Award, and he won that also on the basis of running the task force.
So what was your vision for this task force? So you set up a new group and you brought people together. What was the goal of the task force originally that it would do?
So we circulated questionnaires asking those questions. What should we do? What is our mandate? And we met at the Metropole Hotel in Brussels. I don't know if you know much about that place, but it's where a lot of important physicists, Nobel laureates have met, and there are famous pictures of meetings there with about as many Nobel Prize winning people in the picture, and they met in some of the same rooms that we use. So the Madame Curie room in the Metropole Hotel. So I was very much into this kind of analogy between these documents we were crafting about what the task force should do. And it's quite interesting that you ask about that. So that document was written by about 15, 16 people over about 3 years. And when we submitted it to Kidney International, the editor said, I've heard about this paper, and I don't think it's going to require much reviewing, because the authors themselves have been over it for such a long period of time that I think it's going to look like a really excellently reviewed article without the editorial office having to do very much. And they did accept it very quickly. Now, I don't know what you think or what you've been taught about Wikipedia and its status in the world, and so on, compared to other, sources of information. But there are two ways to look at that article. It's called a special article. It appeared in Kidney International. It's very highly cited. It was much earlier than all the other sort of international disaster articles in kidney medicine. But it became inconvenient for people later on that I had done such a well-rounded article. It wasn't me personally, but we had, like all the luminaries in the world, people devoted their entire lives to disaster relief and knew a great deal about it, and were at the forefront from all over the world. And so in the literature, that paper is frequently referred to as an editorial, like it was some short little forgettable thing, because it was simply convenient for people to then say, well, we really started the literature in this area after that editorial. But on Wikipedia, the funny thing is that the ISN page on Wikipedia has been, abandoned for like 5 or 6 years, And so I went in there and edited it so that the ISN, Disaster Relief Task Force is the most important thing on the page, and so and it fits in well. As you may know, I have a Wikipedia page for myself. There is one for the Banff Foundation. There's one for the Banff Classification, and so on. And Wikipedia is really quite fair. If somebody creates a page for you and you don't deserve it, it's often taken down within hours. There's a rapid takedown process. Somebody challenges it, it's sort of critiqued by other people, and if they conclude that no page should exist, it's taken down almost instantly. And if it's been up for a while because you're like a professional speaker, but you don't really have any substance, you're just good at speaking, what happens is even more dire, that there's a longer process, but the process itself stays on Wikipedia forever.
It's going to peer edited out.
Takedown.
Yeah.
So you're gone, but the reasons that you're gone and all the sorts of things about puffery and all these bad words that you never wanted are there forever. So in that realm, I would say that my role and that paper are given great prominence because it happened that I found that page fit in with the other stuff, and I edited it, and it seems like people within the ISN don't really realize that in the great world out there, the ISN Wikipedia page is actually more important than an individual, disaster relief task force article where you could talk about this Solez editorial, some forgettable half-page thing.
What did the editorial say? What was the crux of the?
Editorial? It wasn't an editorial.
Oh, sorry, or the article.
Yeah. The article was in a way too complete. So we listed every country and the number of task force members they had and what our plans were and what would occur, what the notification process was. And what I mean by too complete is that there's certain countries where the name of the country is controversial itself. So Macedonia, which is what people within Macedonia call their country, is also a province of Greece. And there's been this dispute forever, Macedonia will always be Greece and all this kind of stuff. So I just didn't pay much attention. I knew about that, but I thought to most people, Macedonia means Macedonia, it's like close to Kosovo and that sort of thing. So we kind of circumvented the necessity to use cumbersome names for countries that don't like the name that they've been given. Like the official name was the former Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia. That was the official name at that time. So the only part of the article that has ever been criticized is that table, the list of names of all the countries, because I sort of made some arbitrary decisions about making that easy to read and not having these cumbersome names that nobody living in those countries like. But otherwise, it's really an outstanding article. It's highly cited. It's sort of
did the article just lay out what the mission was for the task force?
Yes.
So what was the plan? What were you hoping to do with having the task force?
To get there on time. That was the most important thing, and to not make the situation worse.
Was it specific to crush injury? Were you trying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it applied not only to natural disasters, but to building collapses.
Sure.
And so 9/11, was well within our purview, and so, I wrote an article pointing out that even the closest hospitals were not overwhelmed by what had happened with the Twin Towers collapsing, because most people ran away screaming without any injury or died within the building. There was hardly anybody who was injured and needed care. And that really was the case. It was sad. Everybody wanted to help, but that third category of crush injured people really was very tiny and easily cared for. I mean, New York has a lot of hospitals, and they were not overwhelmed. The triaging went just fine.
So for people who wouldn't know, what is a renal disaster? Is it kind of what the Renal Disaster Task Force is?
So anything that hits the front page of the newspaper, like a terrorist bombing or a building, collapse, or a natural disaster, earthquake, causes crush injury by trapping an arm or a leg, and so you set in motion. It's not direct physical injury to the kidney. The kidney's sort of in the middle, right? And so it's an arm or leg, or 2 or 3 or 4 arms or legs, and so that then sets in motion this combination of release of toxins and third space fluid losses and stuff that leads to renal failure. And there's a lot one can do with very limited knowledge. Just seeing a trapped person and seeing that there's a free limb that you can put an IV in, if you hydrate them, you can often prevent the renal failure. So you don't need to know what renal function is. You can just do it kind of on spec. And so we wrote. We had the idea that everybody would be on our side. I think this was just a fantastic idea, which is what people with new ideas always think. And so the WHO wrote back to me that they were sure that I knew a lot about pathology, because I got to be chairman of pathology. But actually, did I know that dialysis costs a lot of money, and for the cost of a single dialysis machine, you could provide sanitary water and vaccination for thousands of people, which would save a lot more people than a single dialysis machine. And therefore, WHO had no interest in disseminating my article or anything written specifically for them about international disaster relief, because they were into the greatest good for the greatest number of people, had no particular kidney orientation.
Yep.
And they also thought that they understand that there are specialties, but that my trying to sell this to general organizations was going to meet this argument often. But in a way they were wrong, because MSF needed us, we needed them. We needed the legitimacy of partnering with an organization that everybody knew, and MSF was that organization. People accepted that they were welcome in conflict zones, disasters. They had done this stuff before. They needed the resources that we had, but they entered into no-win situations where two sides were fighting each other, and so one side wouldn't like them. So what we actually found, it was a wonderful partnership. There were times when they entered kind of as part of the ISN ARF task force, not under their own name, because
Sure.
they were temporarily unpopular, because the group in charge was aware that they had kind of helped the other side before, and so they didn't like MSF. So it worked really, really well. And Norbert Lemire, massaged that relationship with MSF. He got to know the MSF people internationally very well. Very similar to what you're doing in Canada. He organized pre-customs cleared materials in Brussels, where it was very clear what was being packed and so on, and we're already sort of in international space, and so you could just pick up these things and fly them somewhere, and there was no issue, and it was very well documented in multiple different languages exactly what this was and where it had come from, and so on. The exact opposite of what happened in the Armenia earthquake. I mean, in addition to people sending stupid stuff that nobody needs, like birth control pills and vitamins, so they, as a manufacturer of birth control pills and vitamins, could get a tax write-off for sending them to an earthquake zone, right? But also, they paid no attention to the languages spoken at the airports. Almost everything sent was labeled in a way that nobody trying to decide what to do with this stuff could understand what it was. So even if it was something useful, they couldn't tell that. So the other difference between the era that you're working in now and the era that I worked in is that a phone book is not going to be like crucial to anything you're doing. People don't even use phone books anymore. But I had the phone book for the UN mission in New York. It listed every country, and there were important people answering those phone lines, and they didn't get a lot of crank calls. I think all the bad guys in the world, they may make crank calls to other entities, but the idea of making crank calls to the UN missions just never occurred to any bad guys. So most of the calls they got were actually legitimate people.
They'd pick up.
Yeah, they would pick up, and I could talk to powerful people from any country very quickly. And so it almost worked too well in that I could get the governments on side much more quickly than I could get organized stuff to send there or people to send. So there was a big earthquake in Iran in 1990.
The Banff earthquake.
Yes, yes. And so I contacted them through the consulate at the UN. They responded within days, offering me a 747 aircraft from Iran Air to transport stuff from the U.S. to there. But I didn't have any stuff. So anyway, I thought this is a moment when I have my own 747 now, but I don't have anything to do with it. And I suspect if I do something else with it, I'll be in deep trouble, So
were you planning with the task force doing peritoneal dialysis as well as hemodialysis?
No, they were pure hemo. They thought at that time that PD was too slow and stuff, even though if you think about this idea of just when you see a random arm or leg from a living person crushed under the rubble, putting an IV in, that's not that different from performing PD. It's a sort of slow thing.
Yeah. And if the option is no HD, then something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
The temporizing.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
So I just think that the thinking has changed. But as I was saying earlier, I think that some of the things that happened during that era, to me, should guarantee that nothing like that will ever happen again. And one of those things, talking about puffery and people doing things to make themselves look good. So the first article written in the New England Journal about the Armenia Earthquake was written by a person who actually didn't do much. It was kind of topical, right? The New England Journal liked stuff.
Sure.
Everybody knew that this earthquake had occurred, and this person wrote this article. But the other people who actually went there and did stuff and got there on time and helped people knew that this guy had like come way late and was just kind of observing and writing, and he had a friend maybe at the New England Journal, who knows. Yeah, so I'm having this meeting once again at this wonderful Metropole Hotel in Brussels. One of the people there is complaining about this New England Journal article and saying, it's just mental masturbation. And as he said that word, the very guy who wrote the article walks into the room. There was one of these uncomfortable silences. So anyway, I think that kind of thing occurring back then should make it less likely that you'll encounter the same thing. That the things you're involved in, they may legitimately get into the New England Journal, but it's not just going to be a fluke. And this idea of the romantic experience that male humans need, that they don't get anymore because we don't fight pirates in the high seas and we don't go on crusades and stuff, and that when an earthquake occurs, a certain proportion of physicians want to fly there to have that romantic experience. There's enough experience with that over decades now, and that was one of the main things, that I had to deal with people who went to earthquake zones and then were unhappy with how they were treated, because the 5-star hotels just didn't seem to be working, and people seemed preoccupied with other things and didn't give them the time of day.
You're
and
welcome.
You're in the way, sir. We've got stuff to do. We just had an earthquake.
What do you think that the legacy of the program has been now? Is the Renal Task Force still it's part of the ISN?
It's still active. It's still part of the ISN. It's involved in the refugee crisis, all the sort of modern life things which are not terribly pleasant to talk about, some of them. But no, it is very much a part of that. And also, I suspect that the two of us sitting here differ if we are if we are normal people of our age, then that should mean that, like, when you're choosing something to listen to on the radio at home, that's not CBC Radio 1, which is all sort of talk and news.
But I am a CBC fan.
What?
I am a CBC fan.
But isn't it Radio 2? Because CBC Radio 2, young people keep telling CBC that the news is depressing and boring. So on Radio 2, you may have noticed in the past year that they've contracted the news from 5 minutes to 4 to 3 to 2, and now it's down to 1 minute, because people your age like that, because it's just, they would really like to have no news. But if CBC Radio 2 has to have some news, maybe 1 minute, they can go to the bathroom or something while that's happening, then come back. So that would be the difference between us. And the fact is that talking about romantic experiences, the news used to be more fun to listen to than it is now. When I was your age, it was pleasurable to listen to, not because of how it was presented, but actually what was happening in the world was a bit more fun to think about than it is now. So the difficulty you face either in yourself or other colleagues your age is that you can't make assumptions about what these people know about international affairs, because even though it's on the news, they on purpose don't follow the news. Because it's sort of not consistent with having fun as a as a young person, it is the opposite. It is a killer. If you go to a party in the evening and turn on CBC Radio 1, you'll never be asked back, right? It's a social life killer, right? People will know that you are like the worst person to hang out with. And your career as a social young person is toast. So that's a fascinating phenomenon. So, like, sitting in this room where we're surrounded by art and artifacts from the young people who share this room with me. So it one of the ways in which I sort of keep an edge on them, I know more about some parts of young people's culture than they do, is listening to Hot 107 in the car. So Hot 107 is a generic young person's station. The people in this room are young people, but they're sort of high-performing young people, so they would never listen to Hot 107, but most people their age do. So, like, if there's a new song, I know about it before they do. I knew about, Hello before. I'm sure you're nauseated beyond belief by the sound of Hello now, because it's been so pervasive. But I heard that song before any of them did, and so on. So it's kind of, it's interesting to me that and so people who hear that I listen to young people's station in the car is saying, why would you do something that you don't enjoy? I mean, every car trip.
It's a good question.
Yeah, but it isn't that I don't enjoy it. You don't think that if you listen to Hot 107, you don't, eventually end up with artists that you like and stuff? Yeah, I mean, I do. So, and it kind of makes for a richer life then if I've got like Radio 2 at home and then Hot 107 in the car.
So maybe we'll come back to, we're just to circle back to where we started. Looking around, you've had lots of leadership positions in different organizations and things, and you were talking for a moment about the qualities of a good leader, and you're saying, having sometimes defying the mold. You're talking about things like, the qualities of different leaders you've interacted with, and humility was one thing that you mentioned, and I'm curious, what does that mean to you? Why would that be important for a leader?
Well, I think because you want to bring out the best in other people, and you're sort of walking all over that if you're just lording your superiority over them all the time. The only reason you're the leader is you're like way smarter and cooler than they are, and they'll just never be able to be like you, and so that's why you're the leader and they aren't, and that sort of thing. That's just not the kind of thing that ever worked for me. Like my assumption when I meet a new young person, because this has actually happened, so that it's not like a fantasy, that I can imagine that they are later on going to be so successful and so famous that they're surrounded by impenetrable security and no ordinary mortal humans can communicate with them anymore, and therefore it's potentially such an opportunity that I can get to talk to these young people now, because they may be such awesome celebrities later on, and they're in their sort of juvenilia period where they haven't reached the celebrity. Now, that's not going to be true of every one of them, but it is true of some of them. It's a kind of unpredictable thing, and for me to think that any of them have that potential, I think is a little bit flawed thinking, but it hurts no one, right? It makes them feel good about themselves, that I think that they might be smarter and much more accomplished than me, and do much more than I've done in the long run. And so also the not standing on ceremony when we talk to each other. I mean, imagine if everybody in this room believed that people of different ages really are different species, and they think differently, and everything's different because they're different age. So that means you have to provide translation services and put words differently if you're going to talk to a 71-year-old like me than you're going to talk to one of your 29-year-old friends or something. But I think that's completely flawed. I mean, what we find in this room is we can just talk and it works fine, Like every now and then, amusing things happen that I just think are so cool. Like, I'll be editing something that the young people have done, and I'll write N.A. and they'll say, North America, why did you write North America? I say, no, N.A. means not applicable. I said, oh, I don't have the life experience yet to know that that's what N.A. means. I said, well, that is just so cool, because it never occurred to me that earlier than a certain point, people don't know what NA means, and that's fine. So nothing has ever gotten screwed up because young people were in charge of it, and it's way cheaper. So, like the first 10 years, from 97 to 2007, I ran this entity that you see the sign, NKF Cyber Nephrology, as a funded entity with a budget of about $400,000 US a year and highly paid professionals doing everything. And then in 2007, the NKF said that it was getting hard for them to justify sending so much money out of the US. They raise money door to door, and they don't say, we would like you to give money to the NKF, but did you know we're sending $400,000 to Canada? They don't say that. So anyway, so they said, listen, we want you, we're actually telling you, I don't know if you can tell somebody this when you're no longer paying them, but we want you to keep everything going. Everything. We want you to keep doing everything that you're doing. It's just we're not able to pay for it anymore, but you're a pretty creative and innovative guy, and I think you'll find a way to do it. So that's exactly what I did. I got rid of all the highly paid professionals, but what they had been doing was very well documented, and so I got young people to do the same things, paid them almost nothing, but they got awesome experience, and they ended up running a $250,000 medical meeting at the age of 19, things like that, and nothing went wrong. Like, when you have a very young person in charge of things, there's a kind of enthusiasm that you just don't get in older people. That, like, they realize they're living in an alternative reality. Nobody they know in their extended circle of friends has ever done anything remotely like what they're doing now, and it's pretty, inspiring, and so really nothing went wrong. And so, do I recommend that 19-year-olds run all meetings? No, that would be crazy. It's sort of like the idea of having women run everything, which can also be argued for, because you can prove that women are less, territorial, less likely to actually physically aggress against the other side and all that kind of thing. And sure, there are evil women, bad women, but if women were in charge of everything, the number of conflict involved, loss of life worldwide would go down, but it's just not practical. Similarly, it's not practical to have 19-year-olds in charge of every medical meeting. But so it did kind of work, and so the leadership, I guess you would also realize, what are the characteristics of a humble leader? Well, if you're not humble, like, you need a local leadership role all the time, right? And if you don't get one, you leave the institution, so you get a local leadership role somewhere else. but that's not been the case with me. It sort of depends upon how you look at it. I've been in charge of the Banff Classification for 26 years, and so I'm kind of the leader of transplantation pathology worldwide, and have been for 26 years. But locally, I haven't held a really powerful position within the institution since '92. So I mean, that's kind of a long time. And I used to apply for them until my current superior, Michael Menkel, came, and then I realized he obviously had some skills with people and kind of generating consensus that I didn't have. And I thought, well, that's actually pretty cool to identify somebody who you think is a better leader or can do some leadership things that you can't do. And so yeah. Anyway, that's. So it isn't. These things are not signs of power. Like you can think of somebody who is like VP medical and everybody in the hospital lives in fear of this person. I have not held roles like that. I've done a lot of good things in large organizations like the NKF and the ISN and so on. And then there's this idea of in perpetuity. So the informatics side of what I do and the being at the cutting edge of using technology enhanced communications in medicine. Powerful people in kidney medicine, Bob Schreier and others, had the idea that I was so suited for that I should basically do it forever, that I was selected in a non-democratic way. The NKF created this entity of cyber nephrology, and I just said, but I'm already doing it, why don't you let me run it? And they said, fine. They didn't do a search and selection. They just said fine, which I think probably never happens, right? And so he had the idea that I should basically do this forever. That I seem to like this idea of helping people communicate. So it's that kind of leadership that I've done, and the lack of vision that I talk about. I mean, let's talk about exactly what I mean by that. There were characteristics of the way that I ran things that led certain things to happen that were never part of my goal, but were kind of cool. So why does the Banff Classification have no competition? That is because anytime there was a rebel voice, I happen to think rebels are really cool. I'm a fan of rebels, and I, come in, join us. We'll give you a platform. You seem to have different ideas. We'll listen to you. We'll make you a part of our, consensus discussions. And so, therefore, by embracing the rebels and bringing them in, there never was any competition. So, but it was never my intent that we would be the only game in town worldwide, at least not consciously. I can't guarantee you that. I don't know what goes on in my subconscious, but at least I just thought it was a good idea. It seemed morally superior to getting pissed off when somebody complains about what you're doing and telling them some nasty thing to go away and they're idiots. It seemed better to have them come in and share their ideas with us.
Collaboration, just like you did with the disaster. Well, it was wonderful. Thank you very much for the interview. That was excellent. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All
Great.
right.
I think that worked well.
Yeah.
Do you think the I'm not sure, you can almost edit